So welcome to the Playbook for How to Lead a Movement. I am the Interim Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at UMass Amherst. I'm also an Associate Professor in the Eisenberg School of Management. My areas of expertise really reside in organizational exclusion and inclusion, particularly at the nexus of race and gender and sport culture. The work that I've done has been published in top journals, such as the Journal of Sport Management and the Journal of Business Research. I am a research fellow with the North American Society for Sport Management, which signifies the top 7% of researchers in my field. I was awarded the 2017-18 Eisenberg School of Management Teaching Excellence Award and the 2018-2019 Eisenberg School of Management Research Excellence Award. I'm also a former NCAA Division I basketball player for Georgia Tech and Stetson University. I coached D1 basketball and was inducted into the Stetson University Hall of Fame. Our next panelist is Dr. Amira Rose Davis. Dr. Davis is an assistant professor of history and African American studies at Penn State University, where she specializes in 20th century American history with an emphasis on race, gender, sports, and politics. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Can't Eat a Medal: The Lives and Labors of Black Women Athletes in the Age of Jim Crow. Her work has appeared in scholarly journals such as Radical History Review, as well as popular outlets such as the New Republic and Washington Post. Additionally, Dr. Davis provides sports commentary for public venues such as NPR, ESPN, and BBC. She also co-hosts the sports podcast, Burn It All Down. Davis's research has been recognized by granting organizations and popular media outlets alike. Her forthcoming book has been profiled in The Nation, Slate Mag, and Democracy Now! Davis is regularly featured as an expert on matters related to sports, race, and gender in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Sports Illustrated, The Athletic, and more. Our next panelist is Lindsay Kagawa. Lindsay joined Wasserman in 2009 and is currently executive president, talent, and the collective. With a focus on representing leaders in cultural conversation, Colas oversees careers of many elite and outspoken Olympic medalists, including WNBA players Diana Taurasi, Breanna Stewart, Sue Bird, Brittany Griner, and Maya Moore. Swimmer Simone Manuel, beach volleyball player April Ross, fencer Ibtihaj Muhammad, and Paralympian Scout Bassett in track and field. She is a co-founder of Athletes for Impact, a leading organization that brings together athletes and grassroots organizations for transformational change, and is known for her pioneering work negotiating the first inclusion rider in sports, the first major shoe and apparel contract for an out gay athlete, and the first maternity protections in a major shoe and apparel contract. Prior to Wasserman, Colas worked for BDA Sports Management, helping to manage premier NBA talent, and founded both the Women's Elite Division and the agency's charitable giving arm, BDA Giving. Colas received her Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science and a Master's of Arts in sociology from Stanford, where she was an all-District 8 performer and 2-year captain of the women's volleyball team, appearing in 2 national championship matches and won an NCAA title in 1997. Our last but certainly not least panelist does not need an introduction, but we will give her one anyway. Regarded as the world's premier point guard, Sue Bird is a universally celebrated star and the WNBA's all-time leader in assists. She is known for being selfless, driven, encouraging, funny, and smart, and receives regular coverage for her fashion prowess. Seemingly ageless and playing some of the best basketball of her career, at 40, she is one of only 7 women to win an Olympic gold medal. She's actually won 4 of those, a world championship gold medal. She's won 4 of those as well, and an NCAA championship. She's won 2. And the WNBA championship. She's won 4 of those. Sue is also a 5-time EuroLeague champion and an 11-time WNBA All-Star. Was voted by fans as one of the WNBA's top 15 players of all time. Off the court, Sue spends time as a basketball analyst for ESPN, has worked in the NBA front office executive with the Denver Nuggets, and is an outspoken and visible advocate for equality, LGBTQ rights, Black lives, universal health, equal pay and wellness, and expanding opportunities for girls. The summer of 2020 is one we won't soon forget. The murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd in particular, sparked national outrage and protest. Protests that for many is still taking place. At the forefront of the racial justice movement of 2020 and deeply entrenched in racial justice work long before the summer of 2020 is the WNBA. The WNBA serves as the sport league leading the charge in the fight for racial justice. It has been said that the WNBA's very existence is political, and that women playing professional basketball and demanding equitable investment and working conditions is protest. Dr. Davis, you have dedicated a large portion of your life to studying activism and women's sports. Why is it that the WNBA, despite being one of the least funded professional leagues in American sports, can lead so boldly an entire nation's social political movement?
Yeah, I think bold is the way to phrase it. You mentioned that the very existence of women in sports is political, and it has, because it's never been a space ceded to women. Sports as a space has been gendered as male, has been designed in many ways to set up barriers for participation for women. So as soon as we see women fighting to get into sports, it's already politicized. And I think that has made women within the athletic realm a bit more poised to be bold in their not asks, but in their demands to be treated equitably, to get resources, and all of those things. And I think that from that standpoint, it's not hard to understand why the WNBA has taken this position. It also must be said that it's because of a strong union as well. And this cannot be understated, right? We're talking about labor, we're talking about collective action and organizing. And one of the reasons why the W has been able to do that is because they have had bold leadership, because the players have refused to cede the ground, have absolutely taken leadership role. And when we're talking about the organization of the league, the fact that the players have been able to say, this is who we are. We're not going to cede this ground. We're not going to back off our stance. We can go back a few years to see that the league wasn't always 100% behind players who wanted to speak out and use their platform. And the fortitude and the persistence of the athletes to say, no, we are not going to shut up and dribble. We're not going to stop talking. And we're gritty, we're hardworking, and we're fighting for what's right, whether that's pay equity or to bring awareness to police brutality. This is us, take us or leave us. And the league has gotten behind that, but because the organization of players, because of the strong union, it's not an accident that what we saw this past summer comes after one of the most historic collective bargaining agreements that we've seen. And so we have to have those things tied together to understand the space that the WNBA now occupies, because they fought tooth and nail to get to this space. And to fully understand the context, we have to understand those struggles that take us to today.
Thank you for that. As a follow-up, I want to talk a little bit about how race and gender and the fact that the WNBA is so boldly accepting and inclusive of genderqueer, gender nonconforming, non-binary folks. How has that influenced the role of social justice with the league, and particularly the role of the WNBA in sport business leading social justice?
Well, absolutely. And it goes along with, my previous comments that the league is a league that is predominantly Black, and a league that has many gender nonconforming, non-binary people in it, people who are queer. The league has been a league that you've seen investors, you've seen sports marketers, you've seen ownership try to cultivate and put into a box, try to make palatable, and try to have a lot of ideas of like, how do you sell this sport? And I think one of the things that has really occurred is that players being like, we're not going to stay in this box, right? This is who we are. And this is what this league means. And pushing back on the many years in which the idea was to try to find like a palatable white girl with a high pony that could carry the image of the league forward, really gave way to the tenacity of the players that over the last years in the W have said no, like we are the players and we love who we love, we are who we are, we're Black women, you're not going to deny that. And that has meant that if you're going to market the W, you can't afford to anymore shy away from that. And so I think that it put sports business in a position where to market and invest in the WNBA meant to do it on their terms. And I think that that has shifted their response to even the W emerging as a social justice leader, because it just becomes another one of their terms, right, in which you have to meet the W on in terms of their territory.
Thank you for that. Sue, I feel like this is a perfect transition to you and your leadership role in the W social and racial justice activism in the movement. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this place of racial allyship, authenticity, and knowing when to lead from beside as opposed to always leading from in front.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that our league has kind of been living this term intersectionality. I don't even think we knew it, but basically from the start, that's really been the makeup of our league. And I think for myself, I understand, as well as everybody, all the players, that in order, it's really the definition of intersectionality, right? Like in order for one boat, so to speak, to rise, they all have to. You know, in order for one group to be treated fairly, they all have to be. And I think that's where the support for one another comes from. I think we just have a true understanding of that. It's something that we've had to grow up in a way in order to do, but simultaneously didn't really have a choice. Like a lot of times I joke that we would have loved to have shut up and dribble. We would have loved to have played basketball and have been judged strictly on that, you know, but we've never been allowed to do that. And so I just think we've all kind of formed this backbone. We've all formed this, I don't know, this, you know, we're definitely unified, but like this strategic part to us, we're collaborative in a lot of ways. And with that comes listening. And I think, you know, I learned when I came out a couple of years ago, just how important it was and how much it meant to have other people who weren't gay support me in that. And I think, you know, obviously racial issues in our country are not quite the same as, you know, me being able to come out. I'm very lucky in that it was seamless. You know, in a lot of ways I had wonderful reception. So it's not the same, but there are things that I learned from that that I now can use for myself as I have, you know, learned how to be an ally. I think it's a continuing process to grow in that way. And you're going to make mistakes. I always try to tell people that, like, you're going to make mistakes. You can't let that deter you or kind of bump you off the track. You got to keep going. But I do find it's just so important to listen. And I'm really lucky that I'm a member of the executive committee because we're a diverse group. We're this group of 7 that we get to talk and communicate. A lot of, you know, what Dr. Davis talked about, which is like, you know, we've kind of been doing this. Like, thank God for group chats. Like, seriously, that's like really the first thing that came to mind, because we're just able to communicate in a way, as we all know what group chats, you know, what they do for us. It's like quick, it's responsive, you get to hear people's thoughts. And a lot of times it's really a place that I personally can learn and grow in my allyship.
Thank you for that. And intersectionality, both of you have touched on the impact of intersectionality and how the WNBA has really been able to take on the various identities of all the players, right? And use that to not only their advantage, but to their authenticity and be true to who they are, whether that's non-binary or whether that's, you know, being a majority Black league. The idea of the group chat, I think, is interesting for the next point that I want to ask you, because I feel like a shining moment of your allyship, at least in my opinion, or as many say now, this co-conspiratorship was last summer, but also this January. The work that was done towards really campaigning and supporting Senator Warnock's campaign to Congress. So I want to talk a little bit about your decision to become a co-conspirator in this particular way, your decision to jump into the political sphere in this very overt way to support Senator Warnock. And what has it taught you about being an ally moving forward?
You know, it wasn't really a choice. It was just kind of what was put in front of us. I don't think any of us expected Senator Loeffler to write that letter, to come at us, I guess, the way that she did. We had, leading up until this wobble, there was so many Zoom calls and just a lot of emotional energy across the board. but especially for the Black players, right? We were kind of in this, George Floyd had just been murdered. Like these things were just happening. They were fresh. So when I think back to it, I remember it was just the best way to describe it is an emotional energy. And then it was, oh, on top of that, we need to negotiate and get in this really difficult negotiation with the league in order to get the season off. So a lot was happening and it was exhausting. And then we finally kind of achieve what we want. We have some huge wins in terms of what we're going to do. Yes, play basketball, which we're basketball players, so that was a plus, but also we're going to have the season, mean something bigger, represent something more. And it just felt really good to finally get there. Like I really remember like getting to my hotel room and just kind of exhaling, only to wake up the next day and see that, she sent this letter to our commissioner. So it kind of like set everyone back, I think, emotionally. And it was in that moment where, I already knew this, obviously, what was happening this past summer. God, I can't believe it was almost a year ago. Whew.
Yeah.
Wild. But obviously what was happening this past summer impacted me different from my Black teammates, my Black counterparts in the EC and so on and so forth in the league. And I understood that. And here was a moment where I knew that. So I knew I had, for lack of a better, like the bandwidth to maybe take this on. And I also had conversations, particularly with Nneka Ogwumike, who was our president, Lasia Clarendon, who's one of the vice presidents. And it was kind of all happening at the same time where I understood like, oh, this could be a chance. I wanted to do it. So it's not even, I was like, honestly, it was great joy on January 5th. Let me just tell you. Great joy when Warnock won. I was very happy to do this, but I also understood in this whole allyship thing that that's where I could really step up, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I could be, truly active in this. And I always say like, take something off their like emotional plate, so to speak. So that's kind of how that all came about. And it's really my wheelhouse. Like I'm like an organized person. So it felt really good for like, ooh, this is something that speaks to me, like getting strategic, getting organized, like, putting things into action, but also making it easier for some people in our league to not have to deal with this, to allow me to kind of take some of that, like I said, again, off their plate.
Basically, what has it taught you about allyship and being an ally moving forward?
Just the ebbs and flows, I think. When to be quiet, when to listen, when to take a back seat, when voices need to be amplified, when you can be in a supporting role, and then in certain circumstances when you have to take on a little bit more leadership, because either your voice is louder, you have the platform, whatever the case may be, or you're just doing it because it's really exhausting for a lot of people. I always say like, being a basketball player is exhausting, like activism is exhausting. And we were trying to do both. And so it was like this double whammy. And at different times, there were different people who were just less exhausted than our teammates or whoever.
Yeah.
They could kind of take a leadership role in that place. And this was just for me, just happens to be my one example, but everybody at different turns was able to like rise to that occasion when they needed to be.
I appreciate that. And I'm thinking, at least in the work that I do, I'm constantly having people that want to be allies, whether it's to Black folks, whether it's to LGBTQ folks, and not understanding when to step out in front, when to step beside. So I think you explained that beautifully. So Lindsay, I want to come to you next. Whether it's Maya Moore pausing her career to lead social justice movements outside of basketball or being a silent collaborator behind the scenes with the push to support Senator Warnock, you seem to be the consistent link in the WNBA social justice movement. How do you see yourself and the role of people on the business side of sport influencing racial and social justice within sport?
Well, first, I know that it's an honor to be in the seat that I'm in, right? To bear witness to these movements and to be a part of them. And I think to Sue's point, to know when to lead from beside, to know when to be in the background, to know when it's time to step in front. I think it's really no accident who we represent. I think that we've been talking about the power of the women that we work with for a really, really, really long time. I'm very thankful that the world is starting to take notice of their leadership, but this has been work that I think, came to the forefront of what people were noticing, perhaps because they were trapped at home, but also because I think there was more coverage than there's been in the past, that finally people are taking notice of these women and their leadership and their bold example of both, I think, collective movement building, but also what it means to be an ally. Like, I think people like Sue and Stewie and so many other WNBA players who have at certain times stepped out to lead from the front or know when to step to the side, they're an example for men in other sports that frankly, we just don't see. And so in almost every way, the league as this intersectional representation of the power of women to lead in these conversations, I think it has so many elements of that to offer. And so my role in that is really just to center what it is that our clients want. They want equal pay. They want there to be, intersectional movements for justice. They want people to understand their value. They don't need to explain that they're really, really good at this thing anymore, right? They want to have coverage that's more than 4% of all of sports. They want people to understand that there's a desire for merchandise that needs to be met, by sports business. So I think that the work that we do in representing players is very just centered on exactly who they are. And the more that authenticity has become the thing, I think the easier our work has gotten, because we used to hear no a lot, and now the phones are ringing because people have come to understand that women athletes, especially so many of these women athletes of color and Black women who for too long have been erased and not recognized in this world as the leaders they are, people are now starting to understand their power. And we think that that is very much just because there has been more coverage and because there has been more amplification and because there's been more opportunity to see them. And in seeing them, we've been seeing, results. And so I think our role, what we know every day, is having visibility on what's happening in sports business, but also being involved in the personal lives of our clients, because first, they're people. It's giving us a unique vantage point to help advise on what comes next. And it can come down to, just being impact minded in everything that we're doing, right? Like the conversations we're having with clients aren't just about solving a passport issue or negotiating a contract. When we're negotiating a contract, we want to think about how we are going to affect how business is done. And can we do that through the contract? Do we have the leverage to do that? Are we talking about an inclusion rider? How can we push businesses to think about women differently? Because for too long, we've been told the narrative and told the myth that people don't care, and we now know that they do.
Yeah, you mentioned inclusion rider. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the inclusion rider is something that we did a couple of years ago with our client. Simone Manuel was actually heavily influenced by what we were seeing in the entertainment world. But the inclusion rider was the first inclusion rider done in sports, and it was with her swimsuit partner, Tyr, and it related to her signature collection. And it essentially just said that whenever we had the opportunity to hire new talent or bring on vendors or provide opportunity, that we need to do so through a lens of inclusion, meaning we needed to make sure that we were giving opportunity to people who had otherwise or historically been left out. And so, that comes down to using Black photographers, it's using Black makeup artists, it's using non-binary folks, it's making sure that more people are given an opportunity, because, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And so as an agent, I have a significant role to play in, again, creating those spaces in every conversation to do a little bit more.
You, again, at the center of all of these moments behind the scenes, I feel like, again, you're the consistent piece. So I appreciate that about your role in moving women's sports forward, but also using that power, right? I mean, to use the social power that you have in that moment to dictate who is going to be a part of the work that you're doing, I think is powerful and a significant way to really push us forward when we think about inclusion. Along those lines, you're intimately involved with the understanding of sort of the business side and the brand of players and influence WNBA's highly visible active role in social racial justice. The narrative, I think, and most of you would probably agree, has always been that social justice engagement is bad for business, right? And you spoke to this a little bit already, Lindsay, but I want to talk a little bit about what sort of other collaborations besides the one that you mentioned are happening on the business side. What sort of deals are happening where it's very clear that these athletes, their agents, even the brands sometimes are focusing their energy on social justice, whether that be sustainability, whether that be racial justice, whatever it might be. And what does that say about the future of sports? Like, where is this going?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of this movement, what's so exciting about it is that in recognizing where we've had gaps, a big part of that, and I love hearing from the professors on this, is also recognizing that there is bias and that needing to recognize that bias before we can address it. And it is nice to see that's starting to land. And I think what that is leading to is certainly, through things like the inclusion rider that we can force in so that in those daily decisions, inclusion has to be considered and centered, but we're starting to see more investment in storytelling where people need to be able to tell their own stories. So be that women, be that non-binary, gender non-conforming, be that, a Black woman, be that whomever, being able to tell your own story is so critical. And seeing that investment, I think, moves culture. And so it's exciting to see that. And for us, it's really about helping people form valuations in new ways and understanding that it might not just be about how many followers you have, but it really might be more about that engagement or the numbers of ways that you connect to people. Like, this is what we know about women, is that our clients are very, very sticky and that they connect with people in a multiple of different ways. And so all of those layers, for a really long time, the myth is that that made it too hard, or that women needed to be everything to be marketable. But it turns out all those things about them are exactly what makes people feel connected. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're seeing more deals that come as a result of that. And hearing more of those stories told, I think, is what's driving all of it.
Yeah, I think you're right, for sure. And I'm always puzzled by people who suggest that we use the same valuation systems that we've used for men, right? Because we know, one, men and women are different. We know that the sports themselves are different. So to use those same valuation systems to make business decisions seems so incredibly, in a lot of ways, ignorant, right? Because we know that we're dealing with different products. So to hold women to those standards certainly isn't fair, but also probably isn't smart. And I love how you've just talked about how organizations are being much more intelligent about how they value women's sports, women brands, right? They're saying it might not be the same systems and criteria that we've used to value men's sports and men's brands, and they're open to the possibilities of changing that. And I think that's absolutely important for the future of women's sports and women as brands in sports, generally speaking. So Dr. Rose, I want to come back to you. How do you see sport business market shifting from a socio-political standpoint?
Yeah, I think Lindsay pointed to a lot of changes, and I think we're in a moment of extreme change, because Sue, when you were talking about how exhausting it is to be an activist and an athlete, it's like also in the middle of a pandemic, which is exhausting everybody in different ways. But the other thing it has done is really thrown in, for sports marketers, right? Like, there's no fans in stadiums. Stadiums cannot be a site for you to like put a lot of time and effort and resources in the marketing, because, okay, what, 2,000 people are going to see it, right? And so there's been a need to reevaluate lots of previously held assumptions about what good business practice looks like. The social justice narrative, we can see even now people really want to be wedded to it. And I think that compels us to stop and say, like, why are you clinging so much to this narrative, right? Why do you want to run with like a sliver of ratings you have from the NBA and be like, see, we told you? When it's like, first of all, you're playing with faulty data, zoom out, like besides the PGA, who else gained in ratings, the WNBA finals, the NWSL by like 50 million%. It has little to do with social justice and everything to do with access and opportunity. If you put women's sports on TV, which now you have to because of the pandemic and everybody's making these deals, all of a sudden ratings are going up. And so I think that that gap between this idea of like interest that needs to be there to make investment is something that for so many years people have pointed to is just ridiculous. We've known that you can't make these kind of valuations without taking into the context that you were talking to, Neff, right? You can't think you're going to sell the same products, right? And that doesn't mean go completely left. And, you know, we saw the NWSL try to do this with Lifetime. And it's like, sometimes that doesn't, like, if you sit down to watch sports, your first instinct is not like Lifetime, because that's where the women are. But I think more expanded and kind of innovative views, like the new partnership with Glossier, is a perfect example of that, right? Which is a campaign wrapped up in thinking like, there's multiple ways to understand yourself to be beautiful. And this kind of way that we've said there's a dichotomy between being strong or being an athlete and being beautiful is ridiculous. But it also plays this like really great line where it also doesn't say like, because you're an athlete, you need to over-femme yourself up to like compensate for that. Instead, it's like, here's who we are and we all have different beauty routines. Let us show you them. Bam, partnership. That is like so simple and also ridiculous how like it took this long to get to that kind of simple marketing standpoint. But we're in a time where we're seeing a lot of this innovation come through. And that's a little bit exciting. I would say the other point that I want to make around how this has shifted is that you can also start to see where people are not really invested, right? You can tell who's like, actually, you know, I say about the WNBA all the time, I say they're not new to this, they're true to this. And you can tell that with marketing campaigns too, because marketing campaigns that like come up during Black History Month or like, you know, are very surface level that have no other engagement, that doesn't connect to any other action, falls flat. And consumers can see that. And we talk about social justice as a liability, and I would make an argument as actually a liability to embrace people who are hateful, to embrace people like all the investors who want to run into Kelly Loeffler. Okay, she doesn't have a job now. How do you feel? Like here, you know, these are the things that when we think about valuation, we've accepted this premise, like the conversation is really around if social justice is a liability and not if hate is, right? And I think that there's ways to reframe that, but there's really interesting ways that businesses whether they're individual marketers or big corporations are thinking about expanded ways of like reframing even these foundational ideas about what a value is, what marketing looks like, where you do that. We had Shiz Suzuki, the Assistant Vice President of Sponsorships and Marketing for AT&T on the podcast, on my podcast, Burn It All Down. And one of the things that we were talking about is like the really interesting ways that she's been able to use her position at AT&T to support the WNBA, to support women in esports, to think about what it means to wield that business emphasis, right? Which doesn't just mean, you know, sending stuff into the Wubble, which I'm sure was very appreciated, but it also means doing things like leveraging AT&T's power to call ESPN and say, why isn't the draft on your main station? There's literally nothing else happening in the world, right? And so I think that those are the expanded opportunities we have to rethink some of the very foundational myths that we are embedded into sports marketing, and whether that's rolling it up within social justice, but also efforts of like thinking about gender and sexuality and all of these intersectional things we've been talking about. This last year, between the activism and the pandemic, has created an opportunity that we can really take chances, and I think see new opportunities in terms of sports marketing come to fruition. And I think it's already happening. It's just about supporting those who are doing the work and being very clear about that.
Thank you. I was taking lots of notes, Professor. So this number that both you and Lindsay threw out there, and I think Sue may have as well, the idea of like 4% of what we see in sports media, on television, in print, is women's sports. Like that number has been consistent for over 30 years. That's incredibly terrible, right? Like how has sports media as an entity been so incredibly, sorry when it comes to women's sports? Like, right? Why haven't they been able to move that and make progress in that space. And it's the resistance is, again, I think we've all discussed this numerous times now, is sort of sticking to the norm, not wanting to change and shift and progress forward, and sticking to the way that we've always done things, whether it's valuation or whether it's how do we consider what we're showing on television or in print media. So I want to jump to you for a moment. How do you see athletes pushing the boundaries of social justice advocacy with their brands, their personal brands, or their business? What does that look like moving forward?
I mean, I think we're already starting to see it. I think it's becoming clear. We've all kind of touched on it. It's this this authenticity card that is now being played in a positive way. I think for a long time, I think back on my career, and you felt like, I mean, I was that white girl with the high bun that they were trying to be like, you know, here you go. And even I was uncomfortable because I was being put in clothes that weren't mine and I didn't feel good about it. I was being, you know, not like told to say things, but you know, I'm not dumb. I can like pick up what's going on around me. So I understood how I was like supposed to present myself. And it obviously didn't play well for us as women in the WNBA. And I think that's all changing now. You know, I think everyone's touched on this. We're being looked at in a different way that's not in this like male category, if you will. In a good way. We're being valued in this way. And I think more than anything, the way I view athletes in this world of social justice is there's nobody better to talk to than us. We're constantly put in different locker rooms with different people from different countries, different cultures, different religions, different race, different this, different that, all the differences you can think of. And we coexist and we have respect. And it's not that there aren't hard moments, but you know what? When the conflict happens, because we're on a team and we have respect for each other, we find ways to get through it for this larger goal. And in a lot of ways, I feel like if you stripped away all the sports talk of what I just said, you would have like a really cool country to live in, right? Where everyone's
I agree, actually. I agree.
Yeah. So that's to me, when people say that athletes shouldn't have voices on this, to me, we're assuming that you're comfortable and knowledgeable. There's obviously part of that, again, back to just being genuine to yourself. You need to, as an athlete, speak on things that you're comfortable with, that you believe in. But there's something about, you know, what we've had to go through in our careers that we're actually the perfect people to learn from. So I think it's all coming to a head right now. We're definitely in this moment. I think the world, I think society has caught up with us in a lot of ways, female athletes, and here we are, and it's finally kind of colliding. And I know for me personally, I'm lucky to have someone like Lindsay that I can listen to, learn from, bounce things off, call in when I'm in, you know, the thick of it, who's always going to guide me. And that's the other thing about being an athlete. We're lucky that we're surrounded, you know, and I think that's specific to women. We like to surround ourselves and be collaborative. So I do think it's all kind of trending in the right direction. And again, it's colliding in this way with where society has finally gotten to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're all lucky to have a Lindsay in our life. Certainly, I know I am. So I think for those that are watching, and they're watching because they want to understand what is the playbook for social justice, right? Like, how has the WNBA been able to do this? I want to talk just for a short moment about the evolution, because this hasn't always been the case, right? I can remember, you know, when the W was contemplating putting on those like onesie super tight jerseys, right? And or cutting them in the back a particular type of way, or not embracing the, you know, the Kiss-tron, the camera thing during games because, you know, there might be two people of the same sex kissing. And that's changed significantly, right? Like I feel like now, and I think we can all agree that the WNBA is embracing the ways that their players, their employees, you know, identify with these multiple marginalized identities. And I think that's fantastic. But how has the WNBA been able to get here? What are some key moments that have gotten us to this place? Because I think certainly we can talk about what's happened recently, and that's fantastic. But people want to know, like, how did you get through those bumps along the way of trying to, you know, make the super tight, oddly cut jerseys?
I think I'm the only I'm the oldest, so this is going to make sense, who's worn all the jerseys. I mean, I don't know with the jerseys. The moments that stick out for me are, you know, finally being more welcoming about Pride Month and having a Pride game. That feels like a moment. And I remember listen, like I said, it's not that athletes and teams and, you know, people in that framework get it right all the time. there were people that weren't thrilled about it, you know?
Yeah.
But with those moments, there was conversation, there was learning, and there was growth. And so that sticks out. And of course, Minnesota wearing their t-shirts, first to do it. New York followed suit, and then our whole league kind of backed those two teams. But it was really Minnesota. And looking back, it might seem to somebody, oh, that was easy, of course. But, you know, you rewind, it wasn't easy. They were getting, you know, obviously the police officer, the security walked out of the game. The league backed them at first. So there was a lot happening. So I think those two moments stick out for me that actually changed the course of how the WNBA approached social justice and activism. And I think actually 2016, the Minnesota t-shirts, that really taught, that moment from a player standpoint, that taught us how strong our voices are collectively. Because Minnesota's was pretty strong on their own. But then when the whole league, then it was like, oh, we can't find them. And we're like, oh, wait a minute, when 144 of us do this, you know, it's a different results come.
Yeah,
so
the collective power.
And I think that was the big aha, having witnessed that, I think, inside the Wubble, like literally fishbowl Wubble, like everyone's there together. And there was a lot of conversation even before heading in to something that I think went really beautifully and centered the W and elevated the W. There was a lot of conversation about, does it make sense for us to go? You know, is our work away from the bubble more important? Can we be active in the bubble? And I think the side that ended up getting there, very clear position, was this is where we do our work. And this is the platform we do it from. And we have to do this together. And that is so uniquely WNBA. And I think it is such a call to action and example for others. But these women knew that they needed each other. They knew they needed to invest in the platform for each other, and they knew they needed to be organized. And again, to Sue's point, like, that's not to say that it was all figured out. There were a lot of conversations at every single step, right? Like, what t-shirt, how, who, right? There are a lot of layers there, but what defines it is they did it together. I mean, even thinking back, Sue, to those moments for the people who, you know, chose on the day of rest, should we play, shouldn't we play, even from inside the bubble, but it was always a conversation. And so the listening that happens, the engagement, players seeing each other as valuable in their experience and embracing the diversity of all different points of view was really, I think, a model for people to build from. And it proved that progress isn't always linear. And it's certainly not perfect. And there's some trial and error. And there's always discussion. But seeing the players show up for each other, and then Sue, what really stands out for me is the image of when you all had the vigil and everyone showed up together. And not only was it the activism, right? But it was the healing that occurs when everyone comes together and no one is left alone. And I'm not even sure that got as much attention as it should have, because I think it empowered the WNBA to move forward stronger as a unit by being vulnerable, but being together.
And it's so important to that point, to when you're mentioning that evolution. And so I love those 2 points, because I actually think it's so important to watch how they build off each other. So the fight for Pride Night and the kind of recognition of that is really essential in understanding 2016. Why? Because one of the things that we see happen with Minnesota, then you have New York. If you go back and look at Tina Charles' caption, right? So this is when the fines were threatened, and she got Player of the Week, and she showed up still in the black shirt, which basically like bump your fines, with a million hands on her back at this point. But one of the things they said is like, hey, as a league, you've already proved that you have no problem putting yourself out there in certain ways, right? We've seen what y'all have done for Pride Night, and we appreciate that, but keep that same energy. And having that as a building block to stand on helped in 2016 to point out that gap of support. And then that collective action, especially in terms of the fines, but as it started kind of rolling on, what we saw by the time they made like a promo video for the next season was completely, it was the announcement of take a seat, take a stand, but the entire welcome video of Watch Us Work had like images of the Women's March oversliced with like warming up in a basketball arena, and protest was all ingrained. But the thing that I think is really important is if you go back and watch that promo video, and even if you watch the announcement of that initiative, what Planned Parenthood is highlighted, It's On Us is highlighted, a few things, but nothing that's like specifically centering on like Black women and their experiences. And so to then move up to the wubble and to talk about that moment that Lindsay just described, or to talk about saying her name and to dedicating it, and specifically to talking about the erasure of Black women from conversations of police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, and a way that the WNBA is an ideal vessel for that, because yes, we know something about erasure, right? Like we can talk about the importance of bringing the stories to the forefront, but thinking of that evolution, to me, like that was one of the things that was so inspiring, is thinking of that promo and not being able to necessarily, it was super intersectional, but not being able to locate Black women specifically in it, moving to say her name is that evolution that is absolutely on that trajectory. And it's not linear, it's messy as hell. But I think with the W, this sincere desire to listen from each other, to learn from each other, and to keep moving forward together underscores each kind of moment, each kind of platform of that evolution.
Thank you. You all dropped some beautiful nuggets that I think will be really helpful for people trying to, again, use the very similar playbook for their organizations and moving forward with social justice. How can listeners support the WNBA and social justice advocacy through their engagement with the WNBA?
I mean, watch, support, right? Like you can't applaud what the WNBA is doing and like write 15,000 pieces about it and be like, learn from them, and then not tune in, right? You can't just rock a orange hoodie for the gram. You like, there's so much talent in the league, and it's worth supporting. So I would say that's like a very good first step, is find your team, support the hell out of the players union, please. I just got my new t-shirts with Breaking Tea that have like Black women on it. It's very cool. And so I think that is basic. Tune in, support, find ways to support your local team, the league, the players union. You're off to a good start.
I actually have a Google Doc linked in my Instagram profile that has a list of things that people can do. I'm a big believer in being able to lead and join from where you are. So if you just want to buy the hoodie and rock it on the gram, I'm actually okay with that. But you could maybe buy two.
It's a good step one.
It's step one, right? Like wherever you are, there's something to do. And it's as easy as tuning in. It's as easy as sharing a story on Instagram. It's as easy as following a player. It's as easy as a retweet, right? There are ways to scale that and to build on that every single day. But reading one article about a woman athlete helps that algorithm. And you are doing something, and or going to a sports bar and asking for the WNBA game to be put on one of the televisions. Like that actually matters. And so I don't ever want people to feel like sort of the bar to entry is really, really high. It's actually not. It's just choices. And some people have big choices to make and big budgets to spend on a big marketing campaign with a cool photographer and the right creative and the right talent. But even if you don't, there's still something to do.
Speaking on like the budget, there's some big budgets, there's some little budgets, but you know what takes no money? Like helping change the conversation in your daily life. You know, that's like, I feel like that's something that we've heard now for the last year, having these hard conversations. Hopefully having to talk about women's basketball shouldn't be like a tough conversation for you, but I do think it matters, because even, God, like here I am, not to like pump myself up, I'm a freaking like 4-time Olympian. I've won everything you could possibly win. And even people come to me and say dumb stuff and I have to check them. So it's like, I can only imagine what's said when the WNBA player's not in the room. So just helping change conversations.
Thank you. And Sue, I'm going to come right back to you with the second question for our lightning round. So what can listeners take from the WNBA's playbook to apply to their sport organization, their business, their lives?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've just learned this like right now. It's like I realized it, but now it just like really hammered it home. Even in the WNBA, where clearly you know where we stand on issues and we present with this unified front, there's still a lot of conversations that happen that are tough, where you have to listen to different perspectives, understand one another. You don't always see eye to eye, but that doesn't like derail you. That doesn't make you like put it down and leave it. I mean, even the days of rest, it wasn't that in that moment, like thinking back to it, for me personally, I'll be honest, there was this this aspect of just following what the NBA was doing, where it was like, wait, is that right for us? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's right for them right now. Is that right for us? And there were tough conversations where some people, for just to like make it clear, like some people agreed with me, some people disagreed. But there was moments where we had to talk things through. And then through those conversations, we were able to get to what ended up being like the right choice because it felt right for us, you know? So I guess what I'm trying to say is in those moments where you want to take a stand or do something in your life, in your company, whatever it is, just know it's not always going to be like peaches and cream till you get there. Like there's going to be bumps in that road and you got to stay with it.
That's great. Amira, how about you?
Yeah, I think that the playbook and the blueprint that the W laid out from a standpoint of other athletes, especially athletic activism and whether you're in youth sports or collegiate sports, I advise a lot of college athletes who are like, what do we do, right? Like in many ways, we're a bit more constrained and we're trying to figure out like, how can we operate and we're trying to figure out what playbook to follow. And one of the reasons why I think the W's put such a compelling playbook down is because of the ways that they had conversations with each other and conversations beyond themselves, right? And so that's what it means to call up Kimberly Crenshaw and be like, actually, like define intersectionality in a way that is not like the way it's been used in social media all the time, right? Talking to grassroots activists, being able to say like, hey, here's our platform, here's what we know, right? Here's our kind of authenticity, and how do we link up with other spaces of knowledge, whether that's in terms of organizing, whether that's in terms of, just like scholarship, whether it's just simply somebody who's like, hey, here's an idea, right? Here's a tactic to try. And I think that that's just a really compelling model to follow, is that sometimes you don't have to do all the work to like reinvent the wheel. There's people doing work. And so sometimes it's enough to say, all right, like how can I take the resources I have, whether it's my voice or my budget or my platform or whatever it is, and link up with other people doing the work in other areas, and how do collectively we move closer to the world that we want to see. So I would say that that's like a big takeaway of the playbook that can apply to multiple organizations or individuals.
Thank you. And Lindsay, you get the last word here.
I don't think you need it because I think that you two already just said so much of it. The only element I think maybe I would just emphasize again is how sort of fundamental that humility is in the most successful women athletes. Like when we think about the thread that you sort of pull through the greatest names that we've seen, so rarely are they just about themselves. And they're always about lifting others. And that is a common theme between the best of the best. Like the GOATs are all about lifting others. And that is so fundamental, I think, to being a woman athlete. And I also think that it's so fundamental to the way that we saw the women operating and setting an example from inside the bubble, is engaging those experts and having the humility to say, hey, we need to understand more, because you saw what the decision was and how they decided to come out. What we didn't get to see, and I hope that more stories will be told about that process, but is in getting there, all of the messiness, but also all of the beauty, and bringing in, someone like an Alicia Garza to advise on that. And so I think that the WNBA players' willingness and eagerness to accept all different points of view and to ask experts to weigh in on these big moments, none of these things were done in a vacuum. It was very, very collaborative. I think exactly to your point, Professor, on getting everybody involved who wanted to show up and help. And I think the women really benefited from engaging those points of view. And that's, I think, why in so many ways it's the movement's league, because the movement leaders were engaged with the league in helping make those big decisions and take those, what people may interpret as risk, but make these strategic moves. The movement leaders were involved. And I think WNBA players acknowledge their power and their value in those moments, which I think is really important.
Thank you. So Thank you to our panelists, to South by Southwest for allowing us the space to discuss the WNBA and social justice. You've heard a lot of great things today. The main takeaways for you are to consume, create space, and call out inequality. Consume the WNBA, consume women's sports, buying tickets, purchasing merchandise, watching and streaming games, demanding more games are covered by the media. These are all ways you can and should absolutely engage in social justice advocacy. So support the WNBA, support women, and support women's sports.